discovering behavior analysis was so transformative for me. Once I learned that concept of, oh, it might not be a problem within you, it might be a problem with your environment. Wow, my world was blown open at that point. And I started to really reframe my whole childhood and all of the stressful experiences that I'd gone through as being not a function of some flaw within myself, but rather a function of this environment that wasn't working and people in my environment that were doing the best that they could, but it was not always in an adaptive, beneficial way. So I really started to see like all the stress I had been through as not something that was wrong with me. Like it wasn't a symptom of my brokenness.
Hello, welcome to Act Inspired Behavior, the show about real people and their real stories of transformation and change told through the lens of acceptance and commitment therapy. I'm Gabby Lanier. Okay, so let's play a little game. What is the first thing you think of when you think of the word stress? For me, it's the word or the feeling of tightness, or the phrase, too much on my plate. Or it's the image of my son Matthew. He's screaming at me at 6 a.m. because he doesn't always want to put on new underwear. It's that time I didn't finish a report until the night before. It's that memory I have of being in church, reading a story to the congregation, and dropping my microphone on the floor. It's that time that Matthew ran into traffic and that feeling as I was grabbing his arm and reprimanding him too harshly in public. And then my body shaking as I was hugging him. It's all the experiences connected back to the words conflict and busy and mistakes and being late. And I think honestly for most of us, we associate stress with things that aren't good, things that are bad, things that we don't want in our lives because they suck. And for our guest, Martha Smith, she's amazing, and I can't wait for you to listen to her story. But for her, the word that comes up was the word childhood. As you hear, she has a relationship with stress, and a unique one at that. And I really love all the ways in which Martha relates back to the word stress in her story, a story that starts early on in life and continues today. So, as you listen, think about how stress might not have even been a word she'd used to describe her experience when she was younger, an experience of constant vigilance, of being on guard for the next stressful situation to come to pass. But it is now. And think to yourself, how did stress and the experience that comes with it impact Martha? How did it shape the internalized messages that led her down to this path of what she might call now perfectionism? And how did her responses and behaviors and actions change over time in a way that is now truer to who she wants to be? Also, I just want to say, kind of in the spirit of this episode and kind of the topic that we're looking at right now, I just want to point out that I'm very consciously deciding not to edit this episode to perfection, and that I just leave certain parts completely unedited because, it actually really stresses me out. And I wanted to see if I could just let it be because it forces me to confront my own perfectionism and also gives me way more time to enjoy my weekend right now. So enjoy all those little imperfections and funny things that I like to say and do in my interviews, knowing that it is kind of stressing me out right now just thinking about it, but I'm also smiling and enjoying my messy, non-perfect life.
All right. Well, welcome back. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Last night I was like, do I have my interview with Martha tomorrow? And I looked at my calendar and I'm like, yes, I do.
Yes. I know. I've been so excited. I had speaking of stress, kind of a long week and was thinking like, okay, but I have something to look forward to on Saturday.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny that our topics on stress are not funny. I mean, like stress is just normal, right? But every time I have felt something stressful this week, I was like, oh, I can't wait to just talk about it.
Yep. Like, this is apropos.
Yeah. Okay, quick story and then we'll get started. So I work for the school district and I had the long weekend off. And yesterday was one of the few days where I had daycare and a day off at the same time.
Ooh.
And so they like to take holidays off a lot at daycare. And so I was really excited about it. I kind of forgot about it until a couple days before. And then I was just getting super pumped. And I'm like, these are all the things I'm going to do. It's going to be great. I'm going to take a nap.
Yep.
And then that morning, we get all ready to go. We get in the car. He's excited to go to school. We start walking towards the school. And I'm like, weird, the lights are off. I check my phone. It's not canceled.
Oh no.
And then someone drives up and it's one of the employees. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. We canceled school today. 5 teachers are out.
Oh my gosh. 5.
I was like, really? Okay, great. I totally understand. It's like my hearing went like zzz. And I turn around and Matthew skips back to the car, plops inside, and is like, Mommy, we're going to have such a fun day. And I'm like, uh-huh. I just slump against the car. Like, I can't even hold my own weight right now. It was the worst. Oh,
right. Like, you need a second to physically process the sort of disappointment.
I was like, this is a cute, high level, almost emergency type stress for me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I'm pregnant and all the emotions and hormones and all that kind of stuff. So,
of course. Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Anyhow, okay. All right. I'm just all smiles this morning because
me too.
I'm excited to talk to you. So, all right. So this is what we're going to do, Martha. I'm going to pause and take some deep breaths just to center myself. And then we can go ahead and just get started with the interview.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to take 3 deep breaths and then I'll go ahead and get started.
Beautiful. I'll breathe with you.
All right. Oh, so much better. I cut this part out of the interview, but it just feels so good to do.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I've calmed down a little bit.
Perfect. Back in your body.
Okay. Before we launch into your story, I'd love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the audience who you are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Gabby. I'm very excited as well. So my name is Martha Smith. I am a behavior analyst. I live in Southern Maine in Portland. I work both in in-home support and school-based support as well. I have a couple school-based cases, and I just recertified my first time. So I've been a BCBA for just over 2 years now.
Woohoo.
And I'm from the state of Maine, born and raised here. And I'm so excited to be here with you today and chat and have a nice conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that you're in Maine. We are on the complete opposite ends of the country.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, different time zone and everything.
I think one of the most wonderful things about this last year of 2020, and actually I had someone point this out to me over direct messages and Instagram. She said, the best thing about 2020 was that I got to meet you and connect with other people through this group that we're in. And I totally agree. And there's been a few people who I've really, really connected with, and you're one of them. Like, I haven't necessarily ever seen you in person, but there's something about this year where I have been connecting with people online in a way that I've never done before. And I'm just so glad that I've met you, Martha.
I feel the same way, Gabby. I was so excited to discover your ACT workshop and then join the monthly collective when I could make it. And I totally agree. I mean, it's like this whole last year has been so restrictive in so many ways, for how we typically live.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it really, I mean, it was like an MO to kind of place us in this state of like deprivation with respect to our typical human contact and interaction. So it really did raise the value of like, well, let's look for some other ways where we can connect with people and find some meaning in those relationships.
Totally. Absolutely. Like it's totally set us up for placing such a high value too on connecting with people who share these commonalities, these common interests. And
Yeah, definitely.
all right, this is a love fest here. But you know what? That's good because it's February 13th. It's the day before Valentine's Day.
That's
And
right.
I think we have love on our mind. And we also
Always.
we also have this topic. So I reached out to you because one, you are just so charismatic and fun to talk to, and I knew I wanted to pull some story out of you. And so I gave you I gave you this prompt. I said, "Okay, Martha, can you share a story about stress and how stress has played a role in your life?" And I left it really open-ended. And you came back to me with, yes, absolutely. I can talk about stress. Oh, I have a relationship with stress.
Yes, yes. I know stress very well.
You and stress are buddies. So let's get into your story. I'd love for you to kind of walk us through what that means to you, what stress means to you,
Absolutely.
and how you've navigated through it and kind of changed over the years. So, if you were to pick a part of your life where you want to start this story, where would you start?
Honestly, it starts really early for me. It starts very, very young in childhood, perhaps even before then, to be honest. My sort of family origin story, and I will preface this by saying, my parents, like all parents, are only human. And, they are truly wonderful people and have grown so much over the years and have come so far. And when I was young, they did the very best that they could from where they were at. And it wasn't perfect at all. But they did their best. And I hold absolutely no lingering resentments toward their parenting, but it is a true fact that my childhood was incredibly stressful. And it may have even begun before then in conversations with my mom over the years. She revealed to me that she went through a number of incredibly stressful experiences herself right before and during her pregnancy with me. And over the years, as I studied psychology and behavior analysis and related fields, I learned about, epigenetics and gene by environment interactions, and a lot of research out there that does show that there are actual changes to, gene expression based on what happens in our environment. And I may not know this for certain, may not ever know it, but I think that it's quite possible that I came into this world with a bit of a predisposition to be stressed out. I was born and the stories go that I was a very unhappy baby. I screamed and screamed and could not be consoled, and that really kind of continued throughout my childhood. I was very stressed. Life hit me hard.
So, would you be willing to share like what those stresses looked like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an older sister, so I have a younger brother. He came along when I was 5, and then a couple years after that, when I was 7, my parents got divorced. And prior to that divorce, I don't have a whole lot of like really detailed, explicit memories. I think in order to sort of keep myself safe, my brain and body just decided to forget a lot. But I do have a few memories of my parents fighting and it being pretty explosive, not to the point of like property destruction or, any harm done to one another, but, verbally very loud and aversive, just really stressful to be around as a young child. And they did divorce when I was 7, and that was for the best. But it was kind of a unique arrangement. My dad ended up actually moving into like a little trailer in our driveway.
Oh.
And so he was still like right on the premises. I remember like on my 8th birthday getting up and in my mom's house and then like walking out into the driveway to like see my dad. Which looking back on it is, it's different. It's a little odd.
Totally normal to you, I'm sure.
Of course, right? Like as a kid, you're just like, okay, this is, my parents are kind of the boundaries of my world. And so whatever they're doing is normal because I don't have their point of reference. So he went from living there to, he kind of bounced around. And like my mom comes from a little bit more of a like financially stable background, and my dad less so. But that's also partly due to the relationship that he had with his parents, which was incredibly stressful. And there was a lot of trauma there. So I didn't really have, contact like with my father's parents. I never met them. They weren't part of the picture. And that definitely, I think, had an effect on his parenting style. So with his sort of limited resources, he kind of bopped around. I remember he house sat for a family once. And so I should say my parents had a joint custody agreement. So we went to see my dad on the weekends and we were with my mom during the week. And him moving around a lot and never really having a stable home base, I mean, that was stressful in and of itself. We might spend maybe a year going to his place on the weekends and it was in one location and then it might change and he was in a new location. And always he did not have some of the same amenities that we had at my mom's house. So where he ended up and spent probably 5 or 6 years of my childhood, like the most solid place he was at. He didn't have running water. He didn't have electricity. So my brother and I would go there on the weekends and we were, I was probably 10 or 11 at this point. So he was 5 or 6 and we were like hauling water from a spring that was a quarter mile away in the woods and, walking through the woods carrying buckets.
Wow.
Our refrigerator was like a big Coleman cooler that he had nailed and like huge thick pieces of foam to, and then we kept it in the woodshed where it was cooler even in the summer so that we could have like cheese and milk. Read by kerosene lamp. Like it was literally like going into another era. Like
wow. That sounds like a novel.
Yeah, it kind of was. And it's like nobody, no one else really even knew, like teachers or friends, because we were only there on the weekends and during the week we were at my mom's. And if I had friends over, like they came to my mom's. That whole dynamic, it had its stresses. Just the mere fact of transitioning between homes is stressful. Having parents who don't really get along is stressful. The lack of typical amenities at my dad's, having to adjust to that. And then there were dynamics with each of my parents that were difficult as well. They were really, both of them, dealing with a lot of their own challenges and kind of inner demons. And like I said earlier, they did the best that they could, but it did affect my brother and I. And I began to take on a lot of the stress of sort of emotionally regulating for everybody in my family. Yeah. So I began to learn my parents' patterns with when they were likely to become upset, when they might sort of dole out punishment consequences, punishers, but in a really like inappropriate way. Just sort of they were trying to deal with their own aversive states, and get my brother and I like quote unquote in line. But they weren't really paying attention to the larger contextual picture of like what was going on for us and why we might be behaving that way in the first place, because we weren't really getting our needs met. So yeah, it became a real challenge for me, and I started to become incredibly vigilant on a day-to-day basis, and it was very stressful. I really could never relax, is what it felt like. Every day I was sort of on guard and just ready for whether I needed to sort of change my behavior in order to keep my dad happy and prevent him from becoming upset with my brother and I, or whether my mom was in a place where she maybe couldn't really handle some day-to-day things and I needed to kind of step in and like help care for my younger brother. That happened on occasion. And my mom also, she was really trying to figure herself out, and she was very lonely, I think, and got herself into some relationships, had some boyfriends who were not super healthy, and also really contributed to the stressful dynamic in our home. Having, when you have a your mom's boyfriend trying to like discipline you and your younger brother, and you're kind
Oh
of
my goodness. Yeah.
like, hey, buddy, like this. You're stepping into our world here. And it was just
So unhelpful, I'm sure.
yeah, exactly.
I have a question for you around this whole dynamic.
Sure.
When it comes to, so you were saying like a lot of these events were really triggering. They kind of triggered you into this mode. If you can recall back, what were some of the things you told yourself back then in response to some of these things that were very stressful?
Ooh, a lot of it was filtered through messages that my dad would give me, which it took me years to kind of parse through and understand what was going on there. But he often would tell me that I needed to sort of be the bigger person. I don't think he used those words exactly, but that's was essentially his message. I needed to, it sort of came down to like, I needed to be better. I just needed to work harder, try harder. And that came up a lot with my mom and I. We clashed a lot, and that was my dad's messaging to me, was like, you need to control your behavior in order to prevent this from happening. And I really internalized that and took that deeply to heart. And I would start to tell myself, maybe not really, it wasn't necessarily something that I was like aware that I was telling myself, but it was like a constant feedback loop of, you need to make everything perfect. And that's really what it came down to.
That's so much pressure. I mean, and it kind of sounds like you got some of that messaging from your dad, and then you took in some of that and kind of filtered it back through your understanding, which was you see your parents and they're not maybe stepping up to that same level of responsibility. And then you take that on yourself. And so, what were some of the ways that you responded? How did you respond to those internalized messages?
Well, where it really started to gain traction for me was with my schoolwork, that my academic environment. I think although I told myself a lot that I needed to be perfect, it was so impossible to achieve that within the family dynamic because there were so many variables that were entirely out of my control. I was a child, but where I could actually get that control and where I could direct my behavior in such a way as to always get that reinforcement of like, you're doing well, you're doing a good job, you're as close to perfect as possible, was in the school environment. As soon as grades became a thing, oh my goodness, like, let me tell you about the power of positive reinforcement in the form of an A.
You're like, yes,
really,
my next opportunity to prove my perfection.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And it was like, this is where I can go to be perfect. But it's tricky, like it's a slippery slope, because that started to become a real source of stress for me also, because it was like unmitigated. It was just this yet another area where I was trying so hard, and it was, even when I got the A, it was like, okay, fine, but what's next? Like, where's the next A? And then when I did inevitably start to run into like, well, this is a challenging class. I was, I think, a sophomore in high school when I got my first B ever since fourth grade, when they started doling out letter grades. I was just apoplectic with with shame and with disappointment in myself. I distinctly remember telling a friend of mine that I was going to punish myself by not eating after I got that B. And that's actually kind of a good segue into the other area where I really started to try to exert a lot of control over my life, which was with food. and I began to get into some really disordered patterns of eating, because that was another place where I could control things, and I got all of this attention and what felt like positive reinforcement because people commented on my body all the time. I happened to be genetically, I was just destined to be like tall and thin, and people apparently, like, that was like a valuable thing, which, I didn't realize until people started to mention it. Classmates, I had teachers, even like grown women, tell me they were jealous of me when I was 14, which was really bizarre. It was
Wow.
like a really, looking back, I'm like, my God, I really hope that no adult women are talking to high schoolers like that these days, because it was really confusing. It was like, oh, wow, I'm getting all this attention, and, it must be a good thing that I'm thin. And then that sort of morphed into like, well, what happens if I'm not anymore? Like, what happens if I gain weight? Who will I be? And that was incredibly stressful as well.
Yeah. And thank you for being willing to share some of that, because I think it really paints this picture of, the more we hear these things, we think these things about ourselves, we can kind of try to follow that rule of, okay, if I need to be this way, therefore I need to do this. And it
Yep.
sounds like you did that in your home, like with your family, and
Mhm.
you weren't feeling like you were really gaining enough control around that situation, and you kind of moved on to grades and that perfectionism around schoolwork, and that worked for a while, but then there you don't have complete control. And then that
Mhm.
also can generalize to your body and how you see your body. And so I can see how like stress was one of the beginning kind of factors around this whole pattern.
Okay, I'm just going to cut in and point out a key concept here. Martha's story provides a variety of different stressors, including chronic stress, acute stress, stress that triggers that fight or flight mode, and then that kind of stress that makes her grow. Do you see how she's starting to relate to each one of these stressors in new ways? This last type of stress, the stress that makes you grow, it's really key. And what is the kind of stress that can make us grow? The kind of stress that actually motivates us to live truer to what we care about. One of the reasons we talk about values so much in ACT is because values reinforce our actions. And let me say it in a different way. Living your values means taking action. Listen to what Martha does in this next part, which may be very different from an action you might take yourself, so that she can live truer to her values. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we call these behaviors, these committed actions, or some people might call them toward moves that, or actions that one takes toward values. These are goals or decisions or steps that we can take that are clearly defined and are reinforced by the values we hold dear. And these values are characterized by larger and larger patterns of living. The more we do these committed actions, the more powerful our values are expressed, and the more likely we are to continue doing these actions in the future, because they take on a new meaning and they motivate us to be the person we really want to be. Okay, so let's get back to her story and let's see how that relationship with stress changes and what she does in order to live those values.
As you move forward, it sounded like you were starting to get into some unhealthy habits around just trying around this kind of control agenda.
Mhm.
Where did you go from there, Martha? Like, how did you start navigating the stress and looking at the stress in a new way?
So it really took a while. It really did. It wasn't until my early 20s that I started to make some changes. And between then, so late in high school, my senior year, I actually dropped out. I'm a high school dropout. And it was that, I guess, actually looking back on it, that may have been one of the first things I did that was more for myself and less about like trying to just get control or show up as like this perfect person, like kind of filling in this persona that I thought maybe that other people wanted me to be and that I was like the only place where I felt like I had identity. So leaving high school, that was maybe the first step where it was like, you know what? I am unhappy here. I am stressed out all the time. I'm constantly worried about grades. And then coming into school, I was constantly thinking about my body, just running everything through the filter of what are other people thinking about me? How are other people perceiving me? And so leaving high school was kind of like this liberating moment. And I do remember it was like the first time that I contacted kind of that shock value of having other people be like, wait, what are you doing? Because I was top of my class. And so my teachers, and I think I remember even having a conversation with the principal where he was like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yes, absolutely. Like, I hate it here. To get out. And my parents, by that time, they had started to really make some huge strides in how they were parenting and started to really look at like some of their earlier behavior and come to terms with that with themselves. And so they were really supportive and they were like, yeah, you need to do what you need to do. So I did that. I left, and then I started working, actually. And that was another step for me of trying something new where I was going to be contacting or having experiences in all these new environments where there was going to be a learning curve. And I had to kind of realize like, I'm not going to be perfect at this right away. But I'm also gaining skills in the pursuit of that. And so that's okay. And so I think it was, if I think about it in like the ACT framework, it was like maybe the first time that I was starting to identify some of my own values. Like, what does Martha really value? Not my parents or school or teachers or anything like that, but what do I care about? And then I did some traveling. I actually traveled solo to Costa Rica when I was 18. And I did not speak any Spanish. I had taken French in high school. So I showed up in Costa Rica being like, hola, el baño. And that was about it. And I was there for a few months, and I lived with a family, and I volunteered at a daycare. And I studied Spanish. I took lessons every day at the agency that I took the trip through. And that was really transformative as well, because I went there having no Spanish skills and also being just terrified. So that was a big step for me too. And then moving on and going to college was huge for me as well. And it was really discovering psychology, and then truly discovering behavior analysis was so transformative for me. Once I learned that concept of, oh, it might not be a problem within you, it might be a problem with your environment. Wow, my world was blown open at that point. And I started to really reframe like my whole childhood and all of the stressful experiences that I'd gone through as being not a function of some flaw within myself, but rather a function of this environment that wasn't working, and people in my environment that were doing the best that they could, but it was not always in an adaptive, beneficial way. So I really started to see like all the stress I had been through as not something that was wrong with me. Like, it wasn't a symptom of my brokenness.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much, Martha. And how amazing that you were able to make those connections, because I think, to me, like, that is such amazing inner work that you were able to do. I think a lot of us still can be really stuck in those stories and those histories and not apply these principles back to our own lives and really make sense of it, because it's hard. There's so much there.
Right.
There's just so much that goes into it, but you can really start to see patterns once you look through it through this lens. And so it sounds like you were starting to make some steps towards being willing to do things that were uncomfortable, kind of going against some of these different rules that you have in your head around being perfect, having to kind of control the situation all of the time. And you were getting a lot of value out of these different experiences. And before we, end our conversation, I would love for you to share kind of where you're at right now and some of the things you've done kind of more recently in your life to kind of continue pushing towards this discomfort in service of your values.
Oh, absolutely. So a huge thing that I began to do, actually, this month is my 7-year anniversary of beginning this endeavor in my life, was pursuing fitness, and I began weightlifting. And that was a big, big step for my growth, because picking up weights and beginning that journey really is an exercise in moving toward something that is challenging. So seeing growth potential in something that is actually physically stressful, right? So it started to really continue to just build on and reinforce that changed relationship that I was developing with stress. So when you go into the gym and your whole purpose is like, I want to get stronger, I'm going to be applying like the principles of progressive overload, which is basically doing more over time, you're really moving right into that hard place, which is so, can feel so like counter to some of our, I feel like, societal norms about stress, which is, you need to reduce stress, you need to get away from it, you need to manage it. Mm-hmm. Well, but maybe there's different kinds of stress. And I started thinking about like the types of stress. Like there's really debilitating stress, which is where you're burnt out, you have too much going on, and maybe some skill deficits in handling it. And that was how I would characterize the whole first chapter of my life: childhood, teenage years, early adulthood. And then there's this other stress where it's like, it's motivating, where there's like a growth stimulus, where it's really maybe not that much different from what we might call excitement. Physiologically, it's kind of the same. You're excited about something, or you have a goal that you're moving toward, and yeah, it's a little stressful, but that stress is helping to get you there, because you have these aims, that it's your committed actions, right, that you're going toward, trying to be present with them. It's exciting. And that the gym became really my parallel for that. And I just became utterly in love with it. And it probably for a little bit there almost went a little too far, where I was still kind of like navigating, okay, like how do I incorporate this into my life without, again, trying to become too much of a perfectionist about it. In the early days, I might be at the gym like 6 days a week, and that's a little much. But over the years, I really have balanced that out, and it has just been hugely helpful for me. It's my constant, it's where I go to be present, it's embodied. We spend so much of our lives up in our heads, I think, and being present in your body can be so healing, and can really just reinforce growth. Made me realize that, even when I'm stressed and there's a lot going on in life, I have these things that I'm doing that are so important to me, that just speak to my heart, and make me feel like that I am living my purpose here on earth, because life is short. We're not going to be here forever. And I realized at a certain point, like in my mid-20s with the gym and with my work, that I wanted to really dig in this life and make it meaningful. I didn't want to just be in fight or flight all the time. That was not going to do it for me. Yeah. Really took that deliberate action.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think, like you mentioned before, way back, you were saying how stress can have these different kind of functions, and they can be really, 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 really aversive, to the point where we have to minimize them for our own health and safety. And Absolutely. There's other stressors that can actually have a completely opposite function, where it moves us in a direction toward the things that we really want. Like you were saying, that progressive weight training, or toward a degree, living a purpose that is really meaningful to you. And at the very beginning of our conversation, we were talking about how stress has kind of become your buddy, and you no longer push your buddy away. It's part of your life, and your life is short. Yeah. We spend all of our lives pushing stress away, trying to minimize it, get rid of it, run away from it, control it. We're going to spend so much of our time and energy doing that work, rather than doing kind of what for you is valuable, this weight training. And I know that you've done competitions and things like that too, which is super awesome. And I'm just really grateful that you shared this, because I think we can all look to our own lives and say, yep, there's stress that we have. Some of it we can control and minimize, and that's probably a good thing. And some of it we just have to kind of live with. And the more we can relate to that stress in a way that's a little bit more accepting, all the better. So
100%. Yep.
All right, Martha, I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for sharing some of those hard moments in your life, because
of course,
they're just, it just shows how you can look at someone like you you have a real history, a real background, and a story that that hasn't been easy, and you can still have an amazing, wonderful life, where you're doing the things you love.
Yes, exactly. It's funny. I just was visiting home, and my relationship with my parents now is that, better than it's ever been. It's really wonderful now. And it is so important to me to keep those relationships going and make them healthy. So that's another, value and action of mine. And as I was there with my family, just reflecting on how good it felt to be there, the fact that I was glad to be there. My mom said to me, she's like, Martha, you seem just so light, like nothing phases you. And I just kind of looked at her and was like, Mom, like I'm 30 now. And I'm like, Mom, I spent like 25, 26 years being very phased. And like, I'm done. Like I am all set with that now. Like, you're absolutely right. I now, because I've chosen to be. I want to be light and enjoy life.
You're just letting that go. You're letting
it
go.
Right. Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's so perfect. Okay, Martha. But yes, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday and a wonderful Valentine's Day.
Yes, you too. Happy Valentine's Day. Lots of love.
Okay.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, Martha. In this episode, you heard from Martha Smith, a wonderful, spirited, intelligent, fun-loving behavior analyst and competitive weight trainer who has literally grown stronger because of her stressful experiences. Over the years, she learned to identify her patterns of perfectionism that were triggered by stress, and a pattern of perfectionism that was actually characterized by someone else's values and not her own. But over time, she learned to change her relationship with stress and to change her perspective just enough to see that stress was no longer a word or experience that made her turn away or go into fight or flight mode. It was an opportunity to lean into some of those really uncomfortable decisions, making it a stimulus for growth, making it a stimulus for those committed actions. I want to say that I'm feeling really stressed out right now, and I've probably mentioned that a couple of different times in several different ways, but for a variety of reasons. And listening to this story, first of all, it just made me laugh when I listened back to it, but it also gave me an opportunity to check myself and realize that I don't have to be perfect in order to cope with the stress. The stress, for example, of just everyday life, parenting a 4-year-old, or the stress of an upcoming life-changing situation like birthing a baby. In fact, striving for perfection might also make the struggle that I have with stress all the more painful. So I'm learning to sit with that stress and in the process ask myself, what does this stress say about my deepest values? How can I move forward in a way that lives true to those deepest desires, rather than some value I think others would want for me? I want to share that as I start to wind down in some of my creative projects like this podcast, while I'm starting to prepare for a big, physically stressful event going into labor. Martha's story made me realize that, like her experience with weight training and the process of progressive overload, that I'm in a way preparing for the experience of a natural birth. Every single opportunity I've had when it comes to experiencing hard, difficult, and even painful things makes me think and perhaps question, can I wait until natural labor is induced? Can I handle a labor without pain medication? Can I handle the disappointment if I don't get the kind of experience I have planned? I look back at my previous labor with Matthew and say, no. But now it's different, and I don't look at labor pain as a means to an end anymore, or this kind of unfortunate side effect of pregnancy. I see it as an opportunity to embrace difficulty, to feel and even enjoy the process of what my body can experience. And honestly, it makes me want to cry a little bit, because before I was literally numb to the pain. And I distracted the hell out of myself during my last labor experience. And for me then, it was what I needed after being 2 weeks late and having a 10-pound baby, which could not be birthed naturally, and a labor that ended in C-section. But this time around, I want something different. I want to approach it differently, with this sense of openness, to even maybe enjoy the stress of it all, the pain, the emotions, in service of experiencing that bit of pure joy of seeing my baby and getting to know whether I'm having a boy or a girl. To this, I welcome the stress and the value of presence and unconditional love that I have for this little one, squirming away in my belly.
There you go. You can start. Yeah. Nice and steady at 120.
If you are interested in reaching out and telling your story, or would like to learn more through my blog, workshops, or coaching, find me on Instagram at ActInspiredBehavior, email me at gabby@actinspiredbehaviorcoaching.com, or use the link listed in my show notes. I'd love to hear from you. To live truer to your values. Damn it, let me say that again. Okay. If this episode resonated with you, subscribe to this podcast and stay tuned for future episodes. And please take a moment to rate and review this show. It's so helpful in getting others to find this show. Thank you so much. Sorry. Okay. That was my husband walking in. All right, let's go back to where I was. Hello again. I want to take a moment and say that this podcast is for educational purposes only. Content and conversation provided in this podcast should not be taken as or replace professional or therapeutic recommendations. As a board-certified behavior analyst, my goal is to disseminate ACT and behavior analysis to the wider public and have meaningful conversations to further explore our understanding. If you are concerned about your own personal well-being, I encourage you to seek out the help of a licensed professional who can provide individual support to you. Thank you so much. No, I'm not going to edit this out. You will not edit this out, Gabby. Okay, where was I?